Hello, thank you for joining the Pgc Data Access and Intake short presentation. My name is Lea Davis and I'm one of the co-chairs of the Pgc Data Intake Committee and Data Access Committee. And so today I'm going to be sharing with you some of the processes that the two committees have developed to try to help new investigators and existing investigators bring data into the Pgc and take advantage of the access that the Pgc provides to additional data. Okay, so the idea behind this pipeline is that really we want to provide an easy way to welcome new members into the Pgc. And then provide again, an easy and streamlined way of bringing new data sets into the Pgc for primary analysis and ultimately secondary analysis and access to data sets for all Pgc members. So we're going to break this down into kind of these pieces of joining the Pgc, the data access piece, and then, the data intake piece, and then the data access piece. So beginning with joining the Pgc. So on the Pgc website, there is a section called Join the Pgc that actually has a lot of information about how to join and who to reach out to. So within this section, there's information on contacting the work group chairs so that you can join the groups that you're interested in participating in those analyses. And there's information on who those people are. So the coordinating committee, the work group chairs who run each individual disorder work group. So the first step really is contacting those folks and saying, that you're interested in joining, that you have data to contribute. And then they will also put you in touch with the data receiving committee members for their work group. And that's really where the data intake stage 1 and stage 2 analysts come in. So the data receiving committee includes about 16 members. It was formed in 2019. We have monthly teleconference meetings where we have, over the past year, developed these pipelines and continue to improve them. So each participating work group designates 1 and sometimes 2 representatives to the data receiving committee. And these people basically act as liaisons with new and existing members. They also work to vet incoming data sets for the work group. And they coordinate with the stage 1 analysts who are assigned to the work group. So the stage 1 analysts are the people who are in charge of, for example, the basic QC that gets applied to all data as it comes into the Pgc. And they may or may not also perform the imputation. Sometimes imputation is performed by the stage 2 analyst, but that's really up to the work groups to decide. The stage 2 analysts are the folks who perform the GWAS and ultimately the meta-analysis. And so we also ask that you are kind to your DRC rep. Remember that this is a labor of love, and all of these folks here are volunteering their time to help with this process. So the process itself, of course, is not perfect. No process is, but we've worked really hard to make this as painless as possible. And of course, if you have any suggestions for improvements, we're definitely all ears. So the process really can be initiated on the Pgc website. You'll see here that there are links to 2 intake forms. One is an inquiry form and the other is an intake form. And we'll go through that in a little bit more detail. And those forms are embedded within the website. And so your DRC rep will refer you to those forms within the website. So I'll take you through kind of a schematic of the overall workflow. So first, the data owner, the new or existing Pgc member, will submit an inquiry form. And this is a short form. It usually takes only about 5 minutes. And the idea is to just obtain some basic information so that we can be sure that it's worth everybody's time, including your time, to actually go through a longer form and the process of data intake. And so this form goes then to the DRC representative who reviews it, and if there aren't any concerns, then the inquiry form is approved, and there's an email that's automatically triggered back to the data owner to ask for the intake form. The data owner then submits the intake form, and this takes a little bit longer. So it's about 30 minutes, and we're requesting more detailed information. This will include information on sample size, on platform, on some of the very basic ascertainment information, phenotypes. And this is really very important to collect at the beginning of this process, because by the time a paper is written and submitted and that includes your data, it can be very difficult to go back retroactively and get that information. So it's always so much better and easier for you and everybody else involved if we can get that information up front. And so then the DRC representative reviews that intake form. And again, if there aren't any concerns that we need to kind of go back and forth on, the form is approved and an email is triggered back to you, the data owner, with a link to upload instructions so that you can upload your data to the Lisa server. And at the same time, an email is triggered to the stage 1 analyst. And again, that's the person who's going to be responsible for the QC and harmonization of the data with the rest of the Pgc data. And so once that's approved and uploaded, the stage 1 analyst then also receives an email from the data owner that includes the path to the data on Lisa, and that QC checklist and sometimes imputation is conducted at that point. And then the data is transferred to the stage 2 analyst. Again, imputation, decisions about imputation are left up to the work groups. So sometimes they ask the stage 1 analyst to do that. Sometimes it's the responsibility of the stage 2 analyst. And then finally, the stage 2 analyst is the person who does work group specific analysis and alerts the data owner to the fact that they have received the data, everything looks good, and that data is going to be now included in the meta-analysis. So there's also a very important person to get to know during this process. That's our data intake officer. So his name is Don Hux, and he really shepherds the whole process. So he's the person who kind of watches to make sure that everything is moving along. And if something gets stuck, he's the person to help unstick it. All right, so next we'll move to data access. So again, like the data receiving committee, we have a data access committee. This committee was formed in May of 2015, and we have about 13 members on this committee. And we have, again, monthly teleconference meetings where we work on the pipeline and try to identify any sticking points and make improvements as needed. It's important to understand that the Data Access Committee is not an approval body, nor is it a permission granting body. And we'll go through that a little bit in the subsequent slides. Approvals to use the data really remain with the work groups, and permission to use the data remains with the data owner. So the DAC is really responsible for developing and maintaining simple and efficient procedures, also transparent procedures for Pgc investigators to access Pgc data. And again, please be kind to your DAC rep. These are also all volunteers who very graciously give us their time and energy to make this process move smoothly. So the goals of the Data Access Committee really are to facilitate access to data while maintaining compliance with regulatory requirements. And this is extremely important and really is the basis for the Pgc being able to, to facilitate research the way that it does. We want to increase transparency and availability of PGC data sets, and to make the process as user-friendly and informative as possible. And importantly, to reduce the reliance on emails and automate as much of the approval process as possible. Finally, it's one of the goals of the Data Access Committee is to track data access and presentations originating from PGC data, so that we can also demonstrate the productivity of the consortium. So this is just a brief example of the productivity of the consortium to date. So we have over 250 active projects, over 230 active investigators, over 350 total projects, and over 280 total investigators participating in secondary proposals. So that's really incredible. And this has all been facilitated through the Data Access Committee. So how does a data access request work? First, the PGC member has an idea for a secondary proposal. They write a proposal, they submit that to the work group that would contribute their data to that proposal. The work group members review the application, and if there are no objections, the work group chair approves the proposal. Then the user will submit the proposal and additional documentation through the PGC Data Access web portal, and the data access reps oversee this process. So they are the ones who keep records of all of the permissions and approvals that get uploaded when somebody requests access to data. And they also oversee the yearly updates. Then finally, the data user gets access to the data on the LISA server. And it's extremely important that all users understand that individual level genotype data can never leave the LISA server. So that data always stays on the server, and analysis is done there. So in submitting, writing and submitting a proposal is the first step. And the best resource for this is, again, the PGC website. If you go to the data access tabs, underneath that, you'll see documents for data access and how to request data access. And that will walk you through how to write a proposal, how to submit the proposal, and all of the forms and documentation that you might need for your data access request. So first, it's a good idea to contact the work group chair and the DAC representative, and all of those contacts, again, are available on the PGC website. Because you might want to ask, is there a proposal on this already that I could just join instead of submitting a new proposal? If a proposal gets submitted that is very close to one that already exists, often the chairs will ask that the groups work together instead of duplicating efforts. Another question that you might want to ask is the data that you need actually available? So in particular, this tends to be a question that people ask regarding phenotypes. And so the phenotype information in the PGC is still rather limited. There's a lot of, of course, case control information, and there are efforts to bring in more nuanced phenotype information. But that's a question that I think you'll probably want to ask your work group chair. You also will want to review the publication policies found under the work groups tab, and just make sure that, that this is something that you're comfortable with. And all of the current templates, again, are found under the documents for data access. And so this is where you would start with your proposal form for a PGC secondary or cross disorder analysis, and that template can be found at the link there. You'll also sign and submit the Pgc Analyst Memo. And again, this can be found under the documents for data access, and an update to this is that now, instead of having to submit or email a signed hard copy, you can just sign the form electronically via the website. So the next thing you'll do is get a an account on the Lisa server so that you can do your analysis on Lisa. And to do that, you'll need an account through the genetic cluster computer. And there is a great website with lots of detailed information on not only how to obtain an account on the Lisa server, but also tutorials and software, technical specs that you might be interested in before starting your analysis. So this is where you would request that, that account. And basically, if you just Google account on genetic cluster computer, you'll find this website. Also keep in mind that you will need an annual renewal of that account. And so to do that, you'll send Danielle Postuma an email with the PGC Data Access Committee in CC and the Lisa Help Desk in CC, and state that you're still working on a PGC approved project and that you'd like to extend your account for another year. And then finally, it's important to acknowledge acknowledge the genetic cluster computer in all publications and presentations. And again, that information is here on the website. So step 3, you'll want to decide what data you want to request. Individual data sets are organized into data packages for each work group, and those are based on the required permissions. So all of the work groups have a fast track data package that can be accessed immediately with just an approved proposal. So that means that there's no additional documentation of permission to use the data. It means that the data owners have provided their permission to the work group to allow users to access the data with just an approved proposal. So you can see that all of the work groups have fast track data packages, and in fact about 85% of the data is held in the fast track option. But of course, there are also other data sets that have been contributed to the PGC but do require additional permissions. So that might include permission from Dbgap to use the data. It might require permission from an individual PI to use their data. And so we honor those requirements and require that users upload documentation of that permission during the process of requesting data. So the next step then is to acquire any additional permissions. And like I said, about 85% of all available PGC data is in this fast track data package. But again, a lot of work groups have at least one repository held data package. And so for those, you will need to apply to the repository to get permission to use that data. Some work groups also have PI held data sets that do require explicit written permission from the PI. And the DAC representatives can point you to the right people. We also have contact information embedded directly into the data access portal so that you can contact individuals who hold the data that you are interested in accessing. So one thing to note is that we do have a Dbgap collection. So we worked with folks over in Dbgap to basically bundle all of the PGC data sets that required Dbgap permission for access. And so what this means is that we now have a collection of 10 data sets that Dbgap holds that all require permission from Dbgap to use. But instead of submitting 10 applications, 10 progress reports, and 10 renewals, you can actually apply for the bundle, this whole collection, and that is one application, one progress report, and one renewal each year. The important thing to understand, though, is that this application is still reviewed by the Dbgap data access committees that are assigned to those individual data sets. And so the permission or approval to use those data sets may come on a rolling basis. And I can say that from my experience, this usually takes about 2 to 3 weeks. The other thing to keep in mind is that you have to be consistent with the data use limitations. So for example, some data sets have restricted use. That means you can't combine them with data on other phenotypes. So being mindful of any data use limitations is important. We also do require yearly renewals for the PGC data access. And so you will get a link to a renewal form, and that will come about 11 months after your initial application and approval. And we ask that you submit that within the 1 month before your application is expired. And so in that application, you can either request continued access, or you can close out your project and relinquish access, or you can close out your project but maintain access under another approved project. And so you can also, we ask you to report on the number of abstracts and publications in the last year. And that includes references for publications and to upload up-to-date permissions if those are applicable. So one thing that's important to keep in mind is that the DAC does perform regular audits, and we can and will freeze accounts that are delinquent in providing these permissions. So we cannot allow users to have access to data, for example, that is held by repository or held by individual data owners if their data access is expired. So if you need help, there are a lot of places to get help on the PGC website. The website itself has a lot of information and tutorials linked within the website. There are slides from previous presentations linked under the data access tabs. Under the workgroup descriptions, you can also find links to the portals and information about how to join the workgroup and how to access data. You'll also be able to put a face to a name. We have lots of lovely pictures of our workgroup chairs, our DAC contacts. So it's a great initial resource to kind of get to know the community. There's a frequently asked questions section also that addresses lots of questions about, I'm a PI, but my analyst needs access and things like that. There's also information on submitting and running jobs and queuing jobs on the LISA website, or you can contact the LISA Help Desk. So I want to give a huge thank you to the LISA Help Desk. Without their efforts, I think this whole process would be so much more difficult. So we really appreciate all the work that they put in. And an incredible thank you to the Data Receiving Committee and the Data Access Committee. You can see that this is really a large number of individuals who have come together to create these pipelines to make the process of joining the PGC and accessing data within the PGC as simple and painless as possible. And then finally, we want to really thank so much the folks who have entrusted us with their genetic information and who participate in this research. So we'll end there, and then in the next few minutes, I'm going to provide a little tutorial for how to access data using the data portals. So we have gone to the PGC website, and I'm interested in accessing data from the Tourette Syndrome Workgroup. So here I am in the Tourette Syndrome Data Access Portal. I'm going to put in my name, institution, phone number, email, I'm going to skip the address, but that is an optional. You can include that. And I'm going to go ahead and upload the copy of my analyst memo. All right. yes, I have a Lisa account. My Lisa name is test user. You will put your Lisa name there, Lisa username there. Now, I have completed the first time user tutorial and the efficient batch usage tutorial. And yes, I understand how to run jobs efficiently on the Lisa cluster. And I'm going to agree that I acknowledge that it's my responsibility to make sure that any manuscripts that come out of this use of my data, of the Tourette syndrome data, need to be uploaded to PubMed Central. All right, the name of my proposal here is going to be test user. You'll put in the name of your proposal. And this is also an important field because this will actually be used to link to your renewal applications. So make sure that you do put in the correct name of your proposal. I'm going to select the Tourette syndrome phenotype, and this is not going to be a cross disorder proposal. Now, I'm the PI of an approved proposal, and I'm going to upload that proposal. I'm going to upload a PDF of the email that I got from the work group chair saying that that proposal was approved. I want to request access to the fast track data package, and I want to request access to the Dbgap data package. I have already gotten my Dbgap approval, so I'm going to select that I can provide my own Dbgap approval. I'm going to upload that approval. And I'm going to sign that I promise not to use this data to try to re-identify any research participants, that I will only use the data for the purpose described in the proposal, and that I understand that no data is allowed to leave the Lisa server. And also that all of the documentation is correct, accurate, and current. All right, so I'll sign here. Oh, yep, it's the last name where my signature falls apart. And click that I understand the data handling processes that are described above. Now this is important particularly for those who reside in the European Union. It's important that you understand that this form itself may be stored on servers that are located outside of the EU. And so I will acknowledge that I understand that, and I am going to submit my request. Okay, mountains or hills, let's see. There we go. All right, so my data access has been request has been successfully submitted to the committee and Lisa administrators, and I should know something within the next 1 to 2 weeks. Typically, I'll say it takes a little, you know, it usually does not take a full 2 weeks. That really can sometimes occur like around the holidays, or you know, if there's some kind of interruption in the Lisa server or something like that. But otherwise, the entire process beginning to end typically takes about 1 to 1.5 weeks. Okay, so that is pretty much it. Pretty painless, and I appreciate your watching this tutorial, and please feel free to reach out to the Data Access Committee or the Data Receiving Committee anytime you have any questions. There are actually lots of us who are very willing to help, and if we don't know the answer, we will get you to somebody who does. So thank you so much for your attention, and I hope to see you in person next year.